Can I take you back to the campuses? Because I'd like to explore the sort of different sides, as it were. So in your TED talk, you began with a cogent example of a pro-Israeli speaker being cancelled by being shouted down. But recently, most of the speech that's been cancelled on campus is the other way around. It's pro-Palestinian.
Yeah.
And sometimes the justification for that is that it makes Jewish students on campus feel unsafe.
Yeah.
Now, you write a lot about feeling unsafe and whether that's a legitimate excuse for cancelling speech. Can you talk a bit about the shoe on the other boot, as it were, the government has particularly weighed in to protect one kind of speech but not the other?
Well, and it's one of these things where I intentionally opened my TED Talk giving that example because talking to the TED audience, I did want to make the point that wasn't getting, in my opinion, sufficient coverage, that 2023 and 2024 were the two worst years for shout-downs of speakers in history, as best we can tell. And the one that I opened up talking about wasn't just a shout down. It was actually a violent attack on the place where the IDF speaker, Israeli Defense Force speaker, was supposed to speak at Berkeley. And almost all of those examples from those 2 years were actually pro-Palestinian activists who shut down those talks. And we were at FIRE busy defending those very same activists when their speech was protected. But I felt like that was a very valuable thing for people to know. However, like over the past couple of years, have we been spending plenty of time defending pro-Palestinian activists and pro-Palestinian professors? Yes, absolutely. And the shoe is on the other foot at the moment. And in some cases, when there's an allegation that this is harassment towards Jewish students, we have seen, and this is unusual in my experience, we have seen examples where it would qualify as harassment for the mistreatment of Jewish students at Columbia, for example. Also, like I said, at Harvard, that was outright assault. That wasn't even harassment. So there are real examples that you can point to. However, we are seeing the weaponization of this argument about anti-Semitism to go after people who just have really, rabid opinions about Israel-Palestine. And probably the most dramatic case we've seen was the capturing, essentially, of Rümeysa Öztürk at Tufts University. She was the student who was a Muslim student who was here on a student visa. And she was, there's video of her just, walking down the street, and suddenly plainclothes immigration officers essentially stuff her into a van and ship her off to, I think, first Georgia and then Louisiana. And the only thing she'd done, and I was waiting, I was like, was there something more to this case? Something more serious? She wrote an op-ed. She wrote an article for the student newspaper saying that she believed that Tufts should divest from Israel. Perfectly protected opinion, not even said in a particularly bomb-throwy kind of way. And it took, and she was in a jail effectively for, I think, almost a month. So we've seen some real horrible cases come out of this using the idea of sort of anti-Semitic speech to go after what is unquestionably clearly protected speech.
Where do you said you're not a free speech absolutist. You don't know any free speech absolutists. Where do you draw the line between harassment and harm? How do you define that?
Sure, yeah. And what I say in the piece, in the TED Talk, is that I call myself an opinion absolutist.
Yeah.
That I think you should always be entitled to say your opinion. And I really try to hit the point that it's also incredibly valuable to always know what people think and why. We're flying blind if we don't know that. But when it comes to exceptions to freedom of speech, I think the U.S. Supreme Court actually is pretty smart on this. I don't agree with everything the Supreme Court hands down, but I do think that the exceptions are very well thought out. So harassment, for example, and it's not even considered an exception to free speech, by the way. It's considered simply a pattern of behavior that is severe, persistent, and pervasive that's directed at a group or an individual, such that a reasonable person would find that it effectively denies them an education. So it has to be something that's repeated, that's targeted, that's based on a discriminatory intent, that a reasonable person would find offensive. So it's more like a pattern of behavior. And by the way, we've seen this rationale abused on campus to go after, I mean, the cover of books, for goodness sakes. This is a case going back to FIRE's early days, where we saw a janitor who was also a student at a particular school get in trouble for racial harassment because he was reading a book called Notre Dame versus the Klan. The book was about the Klan marching on Notre Dame in the 1920s. And in that case, there was a street fight in which the Notre Dame students defended themselves. But because there was a real historic photo of the march, an administrator, some employees at the school found it offensive, and this guy was found guilty of racial harassment without so much as a hearing. So we are very skeptical of harassment accusations because we've seen them badly abused for probably since the 1980s, if you look backwards. Right now, but we're seeing them abused like crazy again.
What would you change in the curriculum so that by the time students arrive at universities, they have a better understanding of the history of and value of free speech?
Oh, excellent question. And I think about this all the time. I think experiential learning really makes a huge difference. And I think that something that really opens up your eyes to, and it's a pretentious sounding word, but epistemic humility that undergirds free speech, by which I mean sort of intellectual humility, knowing you don't know and even can know everything, a tiny fraction of anything at all. And sometimes you're even muddled on that. But a great exercise is doing a debate, which your role is to take the opposite from what you actually think. I think that if every American student had to do that when they're in high school, I think that would be powerful. Because once you actually make yourself take the other point of view, it's very hard from that point on to see people who are on the other side of it as simply stupid or evil. So I think that would make a big difference. I do think that we need to teach civics, and the state of civics teaching in the United States is very, very poor. And I'm always, one of the things I was trying to do in my TED Talk was trying to get people to think a little bit more like scientists about speech than moralists about speech. That there's a value in knowing the human animal. Like, I take a very humanist approach to this, that everything about human beings is worth knowing on a deep and profound level. It's like, I sometimes think like the greater detachment you can have and the more you just think of us as interesting creatures, the more foolish it seems to be. It's like, why don't you lie to me about what you really think? Starts to seem increasingly silly. Like the idea that somehow I'm safer for knowing less about what the misconceptions are on the world. And I make the point in the TED Talk, the way I always illustrate this is, no, lizard people who live under the Denver airport do not in fact control the world. But knowing that your future husband thinks they do, your MP thinks they do, or everybody in your neighborhood thinks they do is incredibly important information to have.
This interview was from the latest episode of Media Confidential, a podcast brought to you by Prospect Magazine. To listen to the full episode, click on the link below. And if you want full access to Prospect Magazine, go to prospectmagazine.co.uk.